Thank you to the Access team for having us up. Great event so far. And if you have any questions, we're at the booth later on, but also feel free to keep this interactive, and I will take them as they come. So my name is Steve Gray. I'm the Zerto account manager for New England and covering the area, working with Access on providing Zerto as a enterprise class replication solution that's specifically based up in the hypervisor. So has anyone heard, as Joe mentioned, another show of hands. I know, Jim, you're a user of Zerto, but has anyone else seen Zerto before? Perfect. So we got a good crew of enlightenment coming. So Zerto is 100% hypervisor-based replication recovery software. So it is specifically designed for VMware and Hyper-V. It's giving you the ability to be very granular in your disaster recovery situations, being able to pick and choose the VMs that you want to replicate, and doing it at a very aggressive SLA, but in a very simple management and deployment manner. So the solution, first off, 100% virtually aware. So what does that mean for you and I? It means that it's going to be fully automated in the aspects of failover, failing back, and migrations, because again, we speak directly with the hypervisor. The solution delivers on very aggressive SLAs. So we measure the RPOs that Zerto delivers in single-digit seconds, and the RTOs in single-digit minutes. And that's all based on how we're replicating the data and then the automation on the back end, which we'll dive into. And the solution is unique because it's 100% software. So again, it makes it easy to deploy. Typical install takes about 30 to 45 minutes, and then very simple to scale. So if I'm adding VMs or if I'm adding additional sites, it's very easy to encompass those changes. We're all very familiar with DR scenarios of the past where if something changed in the environment, I would have to almost re-architect DR from square one. With Zerto, we're born to adopt those changes and to mold as anything changes in your environment. And Zerto is very unique in the fact that it's completely agnostic. And it's the first software out there that allows replication across multiple hypervisors, VMware and Hyper-V, and more to come. And the solution differs itself because it is not just the replication, it's also the orchestration. So it encompasses 100% of your DR scenario within the Zerto suite. Prior to Zerto, everything was done at that LUN level, replicating the entire LUN and possibly replicating VMs that I didn't require in my disaster recovery scenario. But with Zerto, we're now able to remove that lock-in of storage, if you will, and move everything up into the hypervisor, allowing us to be very granular in what we replicate, but very powerful in the way we replicate it. Now, the simplicity of Zerto is really captured in the architecture. Well, before we jump into the architecture, actually, we'll just kind of highlight some scenarios on how Zerto is deployed. Traditional disaster recovery, one site to the other, whether that be a VMware to VMware site today or Hyper-V encompassed. But we also want to make sure that we encompass satellite offices as well. As I mentioned, Zerto can encompass those various locations, geographical, spread across the country or the world, perhaps, all within the Zerto suite. But you can also capture a hybrid approach, whether that be to a disaster recovery as a service model, where you have mission-critical data replicated internally, and then perhaps tier 2, less mission-critical data replicated into a cloud provider, which Zerto allows for. We have over 200 cloud providers to date that offer Zerto as a service. And then the fourth way, which actually was just available in our 4.0 release back in May, is now to the public cloud. Zerto has full integration with AWS EC2 environment, allowing you to act as that is your own data center and replicate directly into it. So Zerto can encompass a wide variety of deployments based on what your business requirements are. The solution has only two components to it, so it's quite simple in that regard. The first component is the Zerto Virtual Manager, or the ZVM. The ZVM is the orchestration layer. This is where you'll pick and choose the VMs, run a live or test failover. This is where you live and breathe Zerto. This is a plugin directly to vCenter. It can be accessed through the thick, the thin, or the web client, and this is where you live. The ZVM, for short, also manages our second component, which is the Virtual Replication Appliance, or the VRA. The VRA, simply put, it's the muscle behind the brains. It's the engine behind the software that replicates the data from one site to the other. The VRAs are all managed by that ZVM. VRAs are deployed on a typical per-host basis, so it doesn't matter how many hosts you have. One ZVM is going to manage all those VRAs. So from a simplicity standpoint, you're managing Zerto through a single pane of glass. Now, once that replication is in, once these two pieces are installed and that replication is up, Zerto is providing compression and throttling and is very efficient on the infrastructure behind it. So Zerto can compress the data at a rate of 2x to 4x, and it can also throttle the bandwidth. So you can say to Zerto, hey, between the hours of X and Y, use this, or between the hours of Y and X, use this, all depending on what you're seeing from the environment. So it's very efficient in that regard. And then once we replicate, what we're replicating to is a journal at that secondary location. And that journal allows you to store up to 14 days worth of data points to recover from should a disaster strike, God forbid. We can scale it down to a minimum of 1 hour if you like. Typical on average we see is around 5 to 6 hours worth of data points to fail over to within a disaster recovery scenario. That journal is very efficient in the disk space that it uses over at that second site. It's actually self-managing. So you can set parameters where if the replication data goes above a certain benchmark, it will expand to a certain level based on what you set. It can also contract itself based on the replication data it's seeing, so that we're not consistently over-provisioning any disk space that we don't need. Now, once this is replicating, we're giving ourselves the ability to have the very aggressive RPO. So after that initial sync, we're only taking the changes that occur on those VMs. It's giving us the ability to get that very granular recovery point objective. So if something happens, say at 10 a.m. at my primary data center, I can fail over to my secondary data center at 9:59 and 59 seconds, 58 seconds, and so forth. It's very aggressive in that regard. And what you're seeing from Zerto is that it's not based on snapshots or LUN-based replication. It's that DVR functionality that's giving you the ability to roll back to literally the second before a disaster might strike. And one of the unique aspects of Zerto is that it's completely agnostic. So it doesn't require you to have the same storage at each site. You can certainly adopt any type of storage platform that you require based on the applications or what the business requirements might be. It's also agnostic in regards to protocol. So it doesn't need to be a fiber channel SAN at the secondary site. It can be a direct attached storage, NAS, iSCSI, does not matter. It's also vCenter agnostic. So it does not need to be the same version of vCenter at each site. As long as it's above 4.0 for update 1, you can replicate across different levels of vCenter. So if you want to do an upgrade from 5.5 to 6.0 at one site and 5.0 to 5.5 at another site, you don't have to do them simultaneously. You can do them one at a time. Zerto will not be impacted. And the fourth way we're agnostic is in regards to hypervisor. With 4.0 coming out in May, we now also replicate between Hyper-V environments as well. So if you're looking at Hyper-V today, Zerto will allow you to replicate from VMware to Hyper-V and vice versa while delivering on the same RPOs and RTOs that you got from Zerto 1.0 when it was just VMware. So the same RPOs in single-digit seconds, RTOs in single-digit minutes. Again, all based on how we're replicating the data. So to kind of paint you a picture as people that are looking at cost-efficient DR, if I'm, say, I was talking with a customer the other day and they just were building out a second site. They're in the initial stages, so they're looking and evaluating at various technologies. And one of the scenarios that we posed to them was they have an enterprise agreement with Microsoft, which means they have Hyper-V for free. They could look at putting Hyper-V out at the secondary site, put some low-cost storage out there, and replicate with Zerto, and they're still going to get that aggressive RPO, RTO, but they're saving money on the front end by doing a very cost-efficient secondary site. Also look at AWS, also look at a colo space. It does not matter. Zerto is giving you the ability and the vehicle to do whatever makes most sense for the business. And Zerto is also it's very important to note that Zerto is a very strong migration tool. So if I'm migrating from one data center to the other, or if I'm moving off some old storage to some new storage, Zerto is a very powerful migration tool. You can run a test migration up front to just make sure that everything is where it needs to be once it's complete, so that you'll have a nice, easy line of sight going into a big migration. Zerto is used for migrations consistently across the board for these type scenarios. Another aspect of Zerto, to dive one layer deeper, is called the Virtual Protection Group, or VPG. The VPG allows you to take the like VMs that make up these particular applications and group them together so that I can have that same application consistency across the board. One of the unique features of Zerto is that it fully integrates with all the tools that VMware offers. So vMotion, storage vMotion, high availability, and so forth. And those are all automated processes. So if I have a VM that gets vMotion from one host to the other, it does not matter. Zerto will automatically recognize that and continue to replicate it. Same goes for the VMDKs on the data store. If it gets storage remotioned, I'll automatically recognize that and continue to replicate it. It does not need to be updated manually by yourself. The VPG is also where I create all my boot orders and IP reconfigurations. So one of the aspects of Zerto is that very aggressive recovery time. The reason being is because everything is automated on the front end with Zerto. So when you want to make sure you do a failover and everything is re-IP'd, boot order, DNS changes, everything is done through that virtual protection group that you see behind me. You can set the IP reconfiguration to have the same network, whether it be in a test or live failover. You can do one and the same or two different. It does not matter, whatever is most appropriate. You can also set the boot order and how these VMs are spun up. And you can also set a priority level for your different VPGs. So in a scenario where there might be limited bandwidth between your sites, you can set it so that your high priority VPGs go over first, medium second, and lows third. It's giving you that extra layer of security so that your most mission critical data is always the most replicated and the most up to date when it comes to a disaster recovery scenario. Bless you. You can also set a backup feature off the virtual protection group. This backup is done either every day, week, month, or year, and it's done off the secondary site. So it's not done at production. It's done at that replicated site that you're sending the data to. And it's done on that schedule that you set. And that schedule is automated. And that backup can be dropped to any location. And we'll dive into that in just 1 minute. You can also set an RPO target, as it hints behind me right here on the bottom left. You can set an RPO target for those most mission-critical virtual protection groups. If it's a mission-critical SQL database or your email, that's the lifeblood of your company. You can set it so that Zerto alerts you if we're approaching a certain benchmark. So if 3 seconds RPO cannot be breached, if we're approaching that for whatever reason, Zerto will alert you, and you'll have the ability to go in and diagnose what the issue might be. I always like to show this real quick. So this is an actual shot of the journal, and we can show this better on an actual demo. But this is showing you the granularity that Zerto provides, literally going back to the seconds before a corruption should happen so that I can minimize data loss. It's giving me a very simple access tool so that I can just pick and choose the time, click failover, and that process is underway. It's literally within 2 clicks of the button that you're already bringing up your disaster recovery site. And with our recovery times, you're going to see that recoverability very quickly. So speaking of the recovery time, as I mentioned, single-digit minutes. Actually, the average of Zerto's recovery time is anywhere from 4 to 6.5 minutes of recovery time, based on the averages that we've seen across the board. Zerto gives you the ability to, again, to automate this entire process. So literally, once I press that failover button, everything is on its way. And one of the unique features of Zerto, I keep saying unique because a lot of the software is unique, is the fact that you can test this anytime, whether it be in the middle of production, on the weekends, which I know no one wants to do that, or during the beginning of the day, maybe at 9 a.m. I know I have a customer that goes in every other Wednesday on a 9 a.m. basis and says, let's test over our SQL. Let's test fill over our SQL. And with Zerto, you can test either a certain application or the entire site. It does not need to be everything all at once. And the testing is completely non-disruptive. So it will not impact the applications you're protecting, and it will not break the replication that is ongoing. That replication will continue in the background. This test is done in an isolated network away from production. Once it's done, we clean up everything for you. So you don't have to worry about residuals or shins or anything of that nature. Everything is cleaned up. So it's as if the test never happened. But with Zerto, we do produce a report. And that report captures everything that was done, whether it be the RTO, the RPO at time of failover, how long the whole failover process took, and it even gives you a run book of every step that we took in that failover process. For example, spun up VM1, took 1 second, took a half a second, and so forth. Gives you everything that you would need to know. And our end users, especially in the healthcare, the financial, and the legal, use this all the time for any type of audit, management review, or any type of government, state, local, federal regulations that are required. They literally just print that right out, slide it across the booth, and they're ready to go. So the testing is completely non-disruptive. And again, you can test this anytime. And again, that recovery time objective is measured in that single-digit minute benchmark. You can also create an offsite clone, separate from the backup. And the majority of people that use the clone feature is simply for any type of testing that they might want to do. We've had customers use the clone they spin up a clone prior to doing an upgrade to an application They run through the motions, see how that application upgrade would go, just so they kind of get the muscle memory down. But Zerto does have that feature built in, and it can be done at any point in time. It's also worth mentioning that you can create your own checkpoint within the journal. So you have the ability to go in and create a manual checkpoint. So let's say you're doing an upgrade, and you want to make sure that you benchmark that point when it begins. If you're starting it off at 11, you can create a journal benchmark at 10:59 and 59 seconds. So God forbid anything goes wrong during that upgrade, I know when it started, and I can go back to the second before it did and begin again and be no the wiser. Now about the backup feature. As I mentioned, it's a full backup and a full restore of the VMs that you're protecting. So if I wanted to create a backup of a virtual protection group, I could designate whether I do that every hour, day, month, or year. Now I mentioned earlier, the two ways I'd like you to think of the backup is, one, it's the extension of the life of the journal. So as I mentioned earlier, the journal can be expanded up to 14 days worth of data points. With the backup feature, you can now keep this up to a year. You can actually keep it beyond a year if you wanted to put it on a different medium, but within the Zerto interface, you can keep it up to a year. So it's an extension of the life of the journal. It's also kind of a cascading model. It gives you a tertiary site to recover from. So for example, we have a customer that replicates from Boston to Marlborough, about 25, 30 miles away. What they do is they take a backup from the Marlborough site and drop it down to a SunGuard location down in Philadelphia. It gives them the ability to have something outside the Boston scope, if you will. And God forbid, if anything should happen to Boston and Marlborough, they probably have a lot more important fish to fry other than their business data. But if something should ever happen to those two sites, they have a full restore of those VMs they're protecting down in Philadelphia so that they can recover. And the same RPOs, the same RTO applies with Zerto on the backup feature. And again, it can be dropped to any location, whether that be a SunGuard colo location or another disk within that secondary site that I'm replicating to, or even into AWS. It does not matter. So I can drop this to any location. It's fully automated, and once that backup is done, we will go ahead and drop it to that location for you. As I mentioned, Zerto is very scalable. So it's designed to encompass not just what DR is today, but also what your future requirements might be. We've talked about going from site A to B. That's what Zerto was born into. But it also has adopted bidirectional replication in its first update to its first release. So Zerto can now do not just A to B, B to A, something we've been doing for years. But Zerto can also do many to many, or many to one, or one to many. However you want to break it down, Zerto has the ability to encompass all the sites within your disaster recovery scope. Another quick story, working with a regional bank when I covered California for Zerto, they had a main site in San Diego and then a secondary site up in San Francisco, yet they had regional branches throughout Southern California that had a very small footprint of infrastructure, perhaps 1 or 2 VMs per branch office. And they were just doing nightly backups of those branch offices every night. And over time, it certainly escalated to become quite a handful of backups. With Zerto, they were able to encompass all those branch office sites and replicate them all up to San Francisco, along with their main data center down in San Diego. And again, that San Diego vCenter was managing all those secondary sites, so Zerto was able to encompass those sites. As long as vCenter can see the multiple sites that you manage, Zerto will be able to replicate all those locations for you within that single vCenter. And it's also multi-tenant, so I can manage this from a hybrid perspective, whether that be replicating mission critical data internally, as I mentioned earlier, and then second-tier data or less mission-critical data up into the cloud. It can be all done through a single interface, and I have a nice hub-and-spoke model to see where everything is going, where everything's coming from, and then what SLAs I'm meeting for my disaster recovery scenario. I'm always a little ahead of the slides. You need to somewhat catch up with me. So this is actually a quick shot of the interface. This is actually new within the 4.0. So Zerto is now on 4.0 Update 1. Just to give you a little background, in 3.5 last year, that's when our backup feature was released. In 4.0, there were 3 big aspects of the software change. One, the AWS integration, so now replicating to AWS. Also, Hyper-V, so replicating between Hyper-V and VMware and vice versa. And the third was the change to our GUI. So this is the 4.0 interface that we're looking at right now. Very streamlined, very smooth approach to Zerto. The first interface that we had was extremely simple. This is even more simple. It is based on HTML5, so it's very streamlined, and it can be accessed from a tablet, an iPhone. So you can be on vacation if you want to do a DR test. Absolutely, go for it. Don't know if you'd want to do that while on vacation, but certainly you are free to do so. And again, you're getting a rundown of everything. So this is the first thing you see when you log into Zerto. You're seeing everything in regards to disaster recovery, whether it be how many VMs I'm protecting, how many VPGs they make up, the total amount of data, what's my RPO, and if everything's green like this, which traditionally it is, that means everything is good to go. I'm also getting a rundown of tasks, so if I have multiple people that have access to Zerto, I can see what they've done, whether that means create a VPG, update a VPG, and these are great, excuse me, these are great feature set, so show you, hey, I noticed a change in Zerto. I can go to these logs right here on the right and see maybe somebody updated a VPG by adding a VM and so forth. So it's a very streamlined approach to disaster recovery, and we'll actually have this running at the booth so we can actually show you a deep dive into what the processes look like. Well, at the bottom, you'll see right here, I'll get out of the way real quick, you'll see the failover button. Simply put, that's where you fail over. Right now it's on test, so that gray bar at the bottom is staying gray, but if this were a live failover, that bar would go red, and you'd be warned that this is a live failover. We want to make sure that you're aware. And then you just click go, and that failover process would begin. I'd be able to pick and choose the virtual protection groups I want to fail over. Once that's done, the process is underway. Very simple process to do. So as I mentioned, to kind of bring it all together, Zerto, before Zerto, you needed multiple products to do replication at the LUN level. You also needed different products to do recovery automation, as well as different products for a backup piece. With Zerto, we're tying it all in under one suite so that it's a very simple process for you and giving you the ability to have just one aspect, one software for the aspect of disaster recovery and business continuity. Now, there is going to be a lot of feature summaries as I click here, and I'll probably get carpal tunnel from clicking this so much because there's so many on here. But what I want you to walk away from Zerto with is three aspects. One, it's enterprise. So it's designed to deliver the most aggressive SLAs out there. RPOs in single-digit seconds, RTOs in single-digit minutes. The second aspect I want you to remember is that it's virtual. So it's integrated directly within Hyper-V and VMware. Also means that it's fully automated in the way that I'm replicating my data and recovering my information. And the third that I want you to remember is software. It's scalable. It's simple to deploy. It will deploy on any infrastructure that you have out there, so it makes it very chameleon-like based on what your requirements are. So the three big aspects of Zerto you want to remember is enterprise, virtual, and software. So EVS, right there. And that's pretty much Zerto in the high-level overview. Again, we'll be at the booth, so if anyone has any questions, feel free to step over and have a chat with us. But I know we have a few minutes right now. If there's any questions, I'd be more than happy to entertain them. Silence. Yes, back row.
Just VM, or do you have application-based plugins too?
Yeah, just VM level, but we can, the virtual protection groups allow you to group those VMs that make up particular applications that give us that application consistency, but right now it's just on the VM level. Yes?
Got a fairly heavy investment in Veeam currently.
Yes?
Can you kind of give me what Zerto brings that I may not be getting with Veeam?
Yeah, so Veeam is a great product. Absolutely fantastic backup product. With Veeam, it's funny, Veeam is probably the most common backup tool I see within the Zerto customer base. The big thing with Veeam is that one, the automation on the failover piece, and then the RPOs are not as aggressive as Zerto. So if your RPOs requirements are on the aggressive side, certainly Zerto is something worth looking at. But if they're on the higher side and Veeam can sustain it, absolutely. But the big thing I've heard, we've actually worked with a couple customers that just had Veeam and didn't have Zerto. Now they have both. The big thing was, I'll do a failover test with Veeam, but it's very difficult to come back.
Yeah.
Zerto does automated failback capabilities so that it's basically retracing our steps on the failover. So Zerto's failback is just as simple as the failover piece. So that's one aspect that people have adopted Zerto. But great question. Very complementary tools, Veeam and Zerto. Yes?
You talked about the discrepancies between vSphere versions.
Mm-hmm.
And how is that handled? I mean, bring up a 5.5 on a 4.1. Can I do that, or?
With Zerto, certainly, yeah. So Zerto, as I mentioned, as long as the version of vSphere is 4.0 release back 1 or higher, we'll support it. Just want to be wary of the hardware versions on the back end on what's supported by
So hardware versions you'd have to keep at the 4.1 level?
Exactly, yeah, as
Okay.
long as it's compatible, but once everything is on the back end there, then 5.5 to 6.0, 5.0 to 6.0, it does not matter. Zerto will encompass those applications. And we're technically certified partner with VMware, so we have a very aggressive SLA that as new versions come out, we have integration with them and support. Right away.
Obviously, it would be best if you had everything on the same version.
Oh, yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Outside of Zerto, definitely.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.